October 14, 1943, 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. A German fighter pilot dragged his pencil across the scuffed leather pages of his logbook, noting what felt like just another familiar kill. It was his 17th heavy bomber AB-17 Flying Fortress that had just corkscrewed downward, trailing smoke and hopelessness. Through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the surviving fortresses attempt to hold formation, their gunners firing frantic bursts of .50 caliber rounds into empty air where German fighters had been only seconds earlier. Aerial combat followed harsh, unforgiving arithmetic. German fighters chose when to strike, diving from the sun and slipping away before the bomber crews could bring meaningful fire to bear. Lacking long-range escort fighters, the American bombers were effectively slow, defenseless targets. That morning, 291 B-17s entered German airspace to cripple Schweinfurt's vital ball-bearing plants. By nightfall, 60 would never make it back to England, and another 17 would be so battered they'd be scrapped on arrival. The Luftwaffe dubbed it a turkey shoot. For the Americans, it became known as Black Thursday, the darkest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. What neither side realized was that this apparent German victory marked the beginning of the end. Within 4 months, the balance of power would shift completely. In late 1943, German fighter pilots had every reason to feel assured. Aces like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, brother of the famed Adolf Galland, and Major Walter Dahl had transformed bomber interception into a precise method of destruction. Their tactics, perfected over months of brutal battles, were designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses of the American combat box formation. This formation, 18 to 21 bombers in a layered defensive pattern, was built on the theory that overlapping fields of fire would deter attackers. Each B-17 mounted 13.50 caliber guns, theoretically covering all directions. But in action, German pilots found the gaps, blind spots in the nose, limited ammunition, and the sheer psychological strain on bomber crews under repeated high-speed assaults. Hermann H. Kohler, commander of 5/JG-11, refined the most lethal technique, the head-on attack, targeting the B-17's weakest sector. After downing his first heavy bomber, a B-24 named Maisie, in February 1943, he went on to destroy 16 more by October. His method was exact: approach from 12 o'clock high, dive through the formation at over 400 miles per hour, fire a 2-second burst at the cockpit and engines, then break away before the bomber gunners could track him. The numbers justified their confidence. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid on August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe shot down 60 bombers, 16% of the force. Losses were so catastrophic that deep raids into Germany were halted for weeks. When operations resumed with the second Schweinfurt mission on October 14, the results were even worse: 77 bombers destroyed or ridden off, and over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. Major George Peter Eder of 2/JG-11 developed another deadly tactic, the company front attack, with 8 FW-190s sweeping in side by side, overwhelming the bombers with simultaneous threats. The effect on American crews was profound. Facing fighters closing at a combined 600 miles per hour, gunners had mere seconds to choose targets and often fired wildly at nothing. At the heart of America's vulnerability was a simple problem: physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 had the range to accompany the bombers deep into Germany. The primary escort, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, could manage roughly 375 miles with drop tanks enough to reach the frontier, but not Schweinfurt. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning had better reach but struggled in Europe's high-altitude cold, plagued by engine failures and freezing controls. This limitation meant that American bombers flew the most dangerous portion of their missions over the heart of Germany, completely alone. German fighters simply waited beyond the range of Allied escorts, then attacked with concentrated force. Luftwaffe pilots called the point where Allied fighters turned back the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, described the tactic in recorded accounts. "We tracked the bomber streams on radar, calculating exactly where their escorts would turn back. The moment the little friends left, we pounced. The bombers knew what was coming. You could see them tighten their formations. The escort limitation created a deadly arithmetic. A B-17 formation might face 4 hours of combat over enemy territory, but only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German fighters could attack, land, refuel, rearm, and attack again while the bombers were still struggling homeward. Some Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 sorties against a single raid, multiplying their combat effectiveness. The P-51 Mustang's development began not as an American initiative, but as a British request. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation seeking additional P-40 fighters. Instead, North American proposed building an entirely new fighter in just 120 days. The result was the NA-73X, which first flew on October 26, 1940. A remarkable achievement in rapid development. Initially powered by an Allison V1710 engine, the early Mustang excelled at low altitude, but struggled above 15,000 feet, precisely where bomber escort was needed. The RAF used these early variants for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack roles, where their exceptional range and low-altitude performance proved valuable. But the transformation that would change the air war came from an unlikely marriage of American and British engineering. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-engined Mustang and immediately recognized its potential. The airframe was superb aerodynamically, cleaner than even the Spitfire. What it needed was a better engine. Harker proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same two-stage supercharged engine that powered the latest Spitfires. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942 and the results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 mph. More importantly, performance above 20,000 feet transformed from marginal to exceptional. The service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. The marriage of American mass production capability with British engine technology had created something neither nation could have achieved alone. What made the P-51 be truly revolutionary wasn't just its performance, but its range. The secret lay in 3 factors. Exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing. Internal fuel capacity of 184 g compared to the P-47's 305 g, but in a much lighter, more efficient airframe, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance degradation. The laminar flow wing designed by North American's Edgar maintained smooth airflow much further back along its surface than conventional wings. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency. While a P-47 burned 100 gal per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 consumed only 65 gallons at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 miles. With 108 tanks introduced in March 1944, radius stretched to 850 miles, enough to reach Berlin, engage in combat for 20 minutes, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter in the world could match this combination of range and performance. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51BS in November 1943. Based at Boxstead in Essex, they were technically part of the 9th Air Force, but were immediately tasked with supporting 8th Air Force strategic bombing missions. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had just days to convert his pilots from P-47s to the new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later command the 353rd Fighter Group, flew one of the first orientation flights and later recalled, "The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something special. The Mustang handled like a sports car. Compared to the truck, like Thunderbolt. It was responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever." The first P-51B combat mission came on December 1, 1943. A fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The first escort mission followed on December 5 to among a relatively short-range raid. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers, more as a combat test than a full escort mission. They encountered no enemy fighters, but the mission proved the aircraft's basic suitability for high-altitude escort work. December 13 brought the first long-range escort mission to Kiel, 490 miles from base, previously impossible for Allied fighters. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate. German pilots, intercepting what they expected to be unescorted bombers over northern Germany, were shocked to encounter aggressive American fighters deep in Reich territory. The final week of 1943 saw intensified operations as the 8th Air Force tested the Mustangs' capabilities. On December 20, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, claiming 3 German fighters without loss. The Luftwaffe, still adjusting to the new threat, continued using their standard tactics of waiting for escorts to leave. But the escorts weren't leaving. German pilots initially mistook the P-51B for the P-47 at distance, expecting them to turn back at any moment. When the Mustangs continued east past the P-47's maximum range, confusion turned to alarm. Radio chatter intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed German controllers repeatedly asking their pilots to confirm fighter types and positions, unable to believe Allied escorts had reached so far into Germany. Major Klaus Meitisch, commanding 3/JG-26, recognized the strategic implications. Immediately after landing from a December 30 interception where Mustangs had pursued his fighters all the way to their landing approach, he reportedly told his pilots, "The air war has fundamentally changed. Our sanctuary no longer exists." March 4, 1944. 25,000 feet above Brandenburg. Through the scattered clouds below, the sprawling outline of Berlin was clearly visible. The capital of the Reich, the heart of Nazi Germany, the city that Hermann Göring had sworn would never see enemy aircraft. Above it, in perfect formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers. And surrounding them, weaving protective patterns, were scores of single-engine fighters bearing American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin represented more than a tactical achievement. It was a psychological demolition of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 100M round trip. The 4th Fighter Group had received their P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, and just 4 days later accomplished what German leadership had deemed impossible. For the Luftwaffe pilots rising to intercept, the sight was incomprehensible. They had been told Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. It was too far. Impossible for single-engine aircraft. Yet there they were, fresh and aggressive after flying 500M, while German defenders were the ones running low on fuel after just taking off. The combat that followed was savage. The Luftwaffe committed over 200 fighters to defend Berlin. But they faced not exhausted bomber gunners, but fresh, eager Mustang pilots with altitude advantage and superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 victories. More significantly, numerous German attacks on the bombers were broken up before they could press home. For American pilots, the P-51B represented a revelation in fighter design. Captain Donald Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would become one of the war's top Mustang aces, described his first combat in the type. "The Mustang gave us everything we dreamed of. Speed to catch any German fighter, maneuverability to dogfight with them, and range to go anywhere the bombers went." The cockpit of a P-51B was cramped but efficiently designed. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that provided excellent forward visibility. Unlike the radial engine P-47 that blocked much of the forward view, the bubble canopy of the later P-51D would improve visibility further, but even the B model's greenhouse canopy offered good all-around vision. Lieutenant Robert Powell of the 352nd Fighter Group recalled the physical demands. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000 feet. Your mouth would be cotton dry from the oxygen. Your back aching from the parachute and dinghy pack you sat on. Your neck sore from constantly swimming to check for enemy fighters. But we had the capability to do the job, and that made all the difference. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin triggered an immediate crisis in the Luftwaffe High Command. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring initially refused to believe the reports when confronted with proof gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showing P-51s over the capital. He reportedly said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." While this specific quote lacks primary source documentation and may be apocryphal, it captures the shock that German leadership experienced. The tactical implications were devastating. Every assumption about Reich defense had been based on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond escort range. Training fields, assembly areas, and aircraft factories had been located in central Germany, specifically because they were thought safe from fighter attack. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, and escort bombers to any target. In the Reich, Major Gunther Rohl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic shift. The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive, it transformed it. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought the battle to us on their terms whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Sturmgruppe were formed, heavily armed and armored FW-190s designed to break through fighter screens and attack bombers at close range. But these lumbering assault fighters were easy prey for nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried mass attacks, with entire group attacking simultaneously, but American fighters had the numbers and performance to counter even these. February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, demonstrated the transformed dynamics of the air war. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production with P-51s providing escort throughout. In 6 days, the Americans flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties, losing 226 bombers, but claiming over 500 German fighters destroyed. More critically, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable pilots. The American strategy had shifted from simply bombing targets to actively seeking aerial combat. General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found rather than staying close to the bombers. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the new aggressive tactics. We'd escort the bombers to the target, but once they dropped, we'd go looking for trouble. We dive to the deck, shoot up airfields, catch German fighters landing or taking off. The mathematics of attrition now favored the Allies overwhelmingly. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. In February 2,121. In March 2,115, these losses included many irreplaceable expert 10 veteran pilots with years of combat experience. American losses, while significant, could be replaced by the massive training programs producing 11,000 new pilots monthly. The P-51 represented more than just extended range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority. The K-14 computing gun sight introduced in late 1944 gave Mustang pilots a significant advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated lead based on range and rate of turn, dramatically improving accuracy. The Mustang's 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannon, offered advantages in ammunition capacity and rate of fire. A P-51 carried 1,880 rounds total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In a prolonged dogfight, American pilots could afford to take shots. German pilots couldn't. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, noted the qualitative difference. The Mustang was far more than a simple fighter plane, it was a complete weapons system, engineered meticulously for its role. While we possessed excellent aircraft, none combined speed, range, firepower, and versatility as effectively. Beneath the impressive statistics lay immense human suffering. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teens, fought desperate battles 6 miles above the ground in temperatures plummeting to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The fortunate perished instantly, others suffered excruciating burns, limbs torn away by cannon fire, or agonized as they descended in parachutes riddled with bullets. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group downed a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and witnessed its pilot bail out. His chute deployed, but he was engulfed in flames. Wisner saw him frantically attempting to smother the fire on his flight suit as he fell, helplessly. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7 reflected on how air combat had changed. In 1943, dogfights resembled a form of chivalric aerial dueling with bombers. By 1944, however, there was no respite. Mustangs would pursue German aircraft to their home bases, circle menacingly overhead, and strike during landing attempts. Safety no longer existed, and the psychological strain was immense. Pilots who had been confident in 1943 increasingly accepted fatalism by mid-1944. Letters home, censored yet preserved, reveal their growing despair. We take off knowing many of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above, always with more fuel and ammunition. As spring turned to summer 1944, the Mustang's extended range enabled a strategic assault on the German war machine. Oil production became a primary target. Synthetic oil plants at Luna, Paulitz, and Bolin, once beyond fighter escort range, now faced regular, protected precision raids. The consequences were devastating. Aviation fuel output plummeted from 175,000 tons in April to 30,000 tons by July, and a mere 10,000 tons by September. Training flights dwindled and eventually ceased entirely. New pilots reached combat units with as little as 50 flight hours, compared to 300 to 400 hours for American aviators. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff of JG-7 described the crisis. Germany had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, yet they could barely fuel them. Dozens of these advanced aircraft sat idle while Mustangs roamed freely overhead. D-Day on June 6, 1944, illustrated the complete reversal of air superiority. The Luftwaffe flew only 319 sorties over France compared to 14,674 Allied missions. Merely 2 German fighters appeared above the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied aircraft had created such dominance that the landing proceeded under an almost unchallenged aerial shield. Oberstleutnant Joseph Priller of JG-26 flew one of those 2 sorties, accompanied by his wingman. Strafing Sword Beach, he later called the mission suicide masquerading as duty. They survived only because the Allies were caught off guard by the lone pair of FW-190s. The Mustang's role extended beyond escort duties to aggressive fighter bombing. P-51 pilots excelled at train busting, destroying locomotives with .50 caliber guns. Each Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets in addition to its guns, making it a potent ground attack platform. Captain Charles Chuck Jagger, later a supersonic pilot, flew with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he downed 5 Bf-109s in a single sortie, yet he reflected on the moral complexity. They shifted from bomber protection to striking any target in sight, often knowing civilians might be present. It was total war, and the Mustang made it possible anywhere in Germany. Germany's technological response came in the form of revolutionary jets, the Messerschmitt Me-262 and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. The Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, outpaced the P-51D by nearly 100 miles per hour and could slice through bomber formations in the hands of a skilled pilot. Yet even these advanced planes could not stem the tide. Adolf Galland, flying Me-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft but recognized the futility. They were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For each Me-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs. These fighters could loiter over German airfields, attacking jets at their most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. The jets of 1944-45 were temperamental, demanding careful throttle management and long runways. Mustang pilots exploited this vulnerability. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group downed 2 Me-262s on October 7, 1944, by catching them in the landing pattern, low on fuel and throttled back. By early 1945, the arithmetic of air combat had become decisively impossible for Germany. The United States produced 15,486 P-51s during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups. Equipped primarily with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did were often manned by teenagers with minimal training. The kill ratios reflected this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 aerial victories, all in Mustangs. He observed, by 1945, it wasn't combat, it was execution. We find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land. The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided revealing testimony about the Mustang's impact. General Der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland in his memoirs wrote, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we had controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Knoke, who survived the war with 33 victories, was more blunt. The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months. Perhaps most poignant was the testimony of younger pilots who entered combat late in the war. They flew their first missions with minimal training, facing experienced American pilots and superior aircraft. One captured pilot stated, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944 with 55 hours total flight time. On my third mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself." The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. By enabling deep penetration raids with acceptable losses, it allowed the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Wehrmacht's Achilles heel, was reduced to 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, preventing movement of troops, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though maintained at high levels through dispersal, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes or train pilots to man them. General Karl Spaatz, commanding United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, stated, "The P-51 was the decisive weapons system of the European air war. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power." Beyond strategic impacts lay profound human transformation. German pilots who had entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the war, if they survived, as changed men. Many spoke of specific moments when they realized the war was lost, almost always connected to their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany. Some German pilots experienced a different transformation from enemy to admirer. Many Luftwaffe veterans after witnessing American material superiority and humane treatment of prisoners questioned everything they had been told about their enemies. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and reality proved devastating to morale and ideology alike. The P-51 represented a watershed in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for decades. Its Laminina flow wing demonstrated the potential for dramatic drag reduction. The integration of British engine technology with American airframe design established a model for international cooperation that would continue through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievement changed fundamental assumptions about fighter aircraft. Pre-war doctrine held that fighters were short-range point defense weapons. The P-51 proved that fighters could be strategic weapons capable of projecting power hundreds of miles from base. This concept would influence everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters capable of global deployment with aerial refueling. The final statistics of the Mustang's impact are staggering. Total Mustangs produced 15,486 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. Europe 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed on ground. 4,131 locomotives destroyed. 9,254 combat sorties over 213,873 combat hours over 134,420 operational losses 2520. The kill-to-loss ratio in air combat exceeded 11:1, unprecedented in aerial warfare. But the true impact can't be measured in statistics alone. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, enabled the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, if not years. The transformation from German laughter at unescorted bombers to complete aerial impotence occurred with stunning rapidity. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany, shooting down bombers at will. By March 1944, Mustangs were escorting bombers to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe was combat ineffective. By April 1945, it had ceased to exist as a fighting force. This transformation wasn't gradual. It was catastrophic. The Luftwaffe didn't slowly decline. It collapsed. The appearance of Mustangs deep over Germany triggered a cascade of defeats from which recovery proved impossible. Each lost pilot couldn't be adequately replaced. Each destroyed aircraft reduced training capability. Each successful escort mission emboldened Allied planners to strike deeper, harder, more frequently. German pilot losses tell the story. 1943 2,967 pilots lost. 1944 12,037 pilots lost. 1945 January to May 4,238 pilots lost. Average pilot experience plummeted. 1943 250 plus flight hours before combat. Early 1944 150 hours. Late 1944 80 hours. 1945 40 to 50 hours. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest achievement was psychological. It shattered the myth of German technological superiority, demonstrated American industrial capability, and proved that democracy could produce better weapons than dictatorship. German pilots who had laughed at American bombers in 1943 were by 1945 refusing to fly suicide missions against Mustang escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe pilots indoctrinated in Nazi ideology experienced cognitive dissonance when confronting American material superiority. Everything they had been taught about racial superiority, about German technical prowess, about American weakness, was contradicted by the elegant, powerful fighter that dominated their own homeland. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. The conversations revealed the lasting impact of the Mustang on both sides. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16.25 aerial victories, sat across from WWII, Germany's third highest scoring ace. Raised his glass and said, to the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. We had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and were fighting over our homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference. Walter Schock, who had transitioned from FW-190s to Me-262 jets, added, we went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force has ever experienced such a complete reversal. Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Mi-262 crash in April 1945, reflected, we laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we could not imagine that America could produce a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang taught us the danger of underestimating one's enemies. You ask. When we knew the war was lost. It was that day in March 1944 when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. We had already lost. The transformation from German pilots laughing at unescorted American bombers to cowering from Mustang fighters represents one of the most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from predator to prey, from confident to condemned. The P-51 Mustang was the catalyst for this transformation. But it represented something larger. American industrial might, democratic cooperation between allies, and the power of technological innovation driven by necessity rather than ideology. German pilots who had been taught that American democracy made the nation weak discovered instead a society capable of unprecedented unity and production. The laughter of German pilots in October 1943 stemmed from a logical appraisal of technical realities. No single-engine fighter yet had the range to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. What they failed to foresee was American ingenuity, the ability to solve complex problems, combine British and American technology, and mobilize industrial capacity to produce thousands of exceptional fighters in mere months. When Mustangs flew over Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter vanished forever. In its place came a grim realization: everything German pilots believed about their enemies, their own dominance, and the war's likely outcome was wrong. The P-51 Mustang did more than win the air war. It shattered illusions, destroyed myths, and demonstrated that true technological superiority derives not from ideology, but from industrial power, international collaboration, and innovation under democracy. German pilots who survived never forgot the lesson. In memoirs, interviews, and reunions, they consistently pinpointed the first Mustang raids over Germany as the moment they understood the war was lost, not the Normandy invasion, not the fall of Berlin, but the arrival of American fighters where they had previously seemed impossible, escorting bombers deep into the Reich with fuel to spare. Even 79 years later, the P-51 Mustang stands as the ultimate symbol of American aerial dominance in World War II, the aircraft that silenced the laughter and ended German control of its skies. The pilots who had laughed in October 1943 learned by March 1944 that they had underestimated their opponents. By May 1945, most were no longer alive to reflect on that premature confidence. The story underscores the perils of underestimating an enemy, the strength of industrial democracy, and the transformative power a single weapon system can exert on history. The Mustang proved that in modern industrial warfare, courage and skill alone are not enough. Victory belongs to those who can produce the most, train the best, and innovate the fastest. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and devastating. The laughter turned to silence, and the P-51 Mustang inscribed its legacy across Europe as the fighter that ended the Luftwaffe's supremacy and, with it, Nazi Germany's hopes for victory.